some of that. So we'll do that for next time. Inshallah, we'll get to some of those questions, inshallah. So, any question before we get started related to the immediate material last time, this time? Well, this time we're going to do it, inshallah. So, we started to talk about this last time a little bit, and here I'll just take a couple more minutes talking about it. So, there are 3 times, as we mentioned last time, that it is forbidden to pray. One is 3 times when it is forbidden to pray, and that is by consensus, as far as all of the schools are considered, all of the madahib are considered. The actual time when the sun is rising, the point in time when the sun is at its highest, right? Its apex, its climax, its zenith, whatever word you want to use, and the moment when the sun is setting, right? When the sun actually is like at the horizon and going down. So those are the 3 different times. Now, there's 2 other times that there's a little bit more detail that we need to just, talk about a little bit. And this is the times when it is preferred not to pray unless there's a particular reason. And then the madahib, they differ in terms of what are valid reasons. So we're talking about what 2 times? The time after you pray Salatul Fajr, right, until sunrise, right? So if sunrise, what time is sunrise right now? Approximately 5:50, something like that? 5:55. So let's say you pray Fajr at 5 o'clock. Let's say Fajr came in at 4:45. You pray Fajr at 5 o'clock. And so after you pray Fajr until the sun rises, right, at 5:55, that's what we're talking about. So that's one time, we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the other time is after you pray Salatul Asr, right? Salatul Asr is a good period of time, maybe 2-3 hours or more even, depending upon the season. And let's say you pray Salatul Asr at 5:15, but it continues all the way until 8 o'clock, right, until Maghrib. But you prayed at 5:15, can you pray any prayers after that? Of course, that's where there's a little bit of difference of opinion as to what you can pray. So those are times when typically there is no prayers for those times, but there are some exceptions that the ulama, they allow for. And so that's what this next section is about. When so it says here the opinions of the jurists, right, on concerning prayer after the morning and night prayers. So I don't know why it says night prayers in the. It's actually a mistake. رأي الفقهاء في الصلاة بعد الصبح والعصر. It should say after the morning and the afternoon prayers. It's a mistake. So, most of the ulama, it says, agree that one can make up missed prayers after the morning, after Salatul Fajr or Salatul Asr. By the way, Salatul Fajr, it also goes by what other name? Anybody? Huh? In the amongst certain Arab countries, it will commonly be called as Salatul Subh, right? Salatul Fajr, Salatul Subh are the same thing. But sometimes Some use Salatul Subh to refer to, or they use Salatul Fajr to refer to the 2 rak'ahs before Salatul Subh. So it's in the name. It's just depends what you call it. Salatul Fajr, Salatul Subh, typically synonymous. But sometimes people will use it to connotate one before the other. Anyways, the morning prayer and the afternoon prayer, most of the ulama agree that you can make up missed prayers. So let's say you missed Salatul Fajr and you, for some reason it skipped you all day, and you remembered at the time of Asr, after you already prayed Asr, oh, I have to make up Salatul Fajr. Or you're making up a number of Salatul Fajr that you missed from whenever. You can do that at that time. Okay? That's according to most. But as far as other like voluntary prayers are concerned, that is disliked. Other nafil sort of prayers that you want to make, that is disliked. And let's see. Imam al-Shafi'i was a little more lenient. So, for example, Tahiyatul Masjid, Imam al-Shafi'i said if there is a reason for that salah, then you can pray at the time. For praying 2 rak'ahs after you make wudu. That was the practice of Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet ﷺ, he stamped and approved. You can do that according to Imam Shafi'i. If you pray 2 rak'ahs, if you make wudu, you already prayed Asr, and it's still Asr time, you can pray those 2 rak'ahs. Those sort of nafil prayers. Imam Shafi'i was a little more lenient than the rest. And so there is a bit of difference in opinion there amongst the scholars as to what one can or cannot do after Salatul Fajr and Salatul Asr. Now, let's see. The next section is about the prayers at sunset, sunrise, and when the sun is at its high point, at its meridian, as it calls it here. And there is a little bit of variance. We talked about the Prophet ﷺ. There's an explicit hadith of the Prophet ﷺ saying those are times when, in various ways in which the Prophet ﷺ expresses that prayer should not be done at those times. Now, this section here is about whether or not those prayers are valid. Right? One thing is whether or not you should do those prayers. Another thing is whether or not those prayers are valid. You understand what I'm saying? You can still pray something at a time when you're not supposed to pray it, but it may still be valid, or it may not be valid. That's what this section is about. So, in the Hanafi school, that praying at such times, these 3 particular times, is not valid. Whether it was fard or nafil, that prayer is not valid. Even if you're making up a prayer, whatever it may be, the prayer is completely not valid. The exception, a couple of exceptions, if you pray Salatul Asr for that day, and you're praying it, and while the sun is going down, you prayed it late, but the salah is valid. Right? Follow? Something can be done that's not supposed to be done, but still potentially be valid, may not be valid. And there's some variance here as to how the scholars they see that. Let's see. Another scenario is if there is Salatul Janazah. At that time, that's also going to be valid amongst the Hanafi school. In the Shafi'i school, they say that if you pray certain prayers at that time, if you pray the fara'id at the time of when the sun is rising, the sun is high point, sun is setting, and some involuntary prayers because of some occasion, there's something that is a reason for praying that nafil prayer at the time you're entering the masjid. It's time for, you pray Tahiyat al-Masjid. In certain circumstances, that those are valid. So there's a little bit of variance in that particular regard, but the general rule that obviously, as we mentioned, is those are times when one should not pray. Forbidden times for prayer. Okay? And there's a little more detail there. That section, they talk about the opinions of all four schools, which is rare in the book in Fiqh Sunnah that Imam Sayyid Sabiq that he will do that. But here he does that because perhaps most likely he did that here in this section because he doesn't in the study of fiqh there's something called a tarjih. You have differences of opinion. Well, which opinion is most correct? The ulama, they will do what's called tarjih. Tarjih means that I consider this opinion more valid than the rest. And oftentimes in Fiqh Sunnah, Shaykh Sayyid, he will do that. He will say that this is the correct opinion, and such. They acknowledge different schools have different opinions, but they'll say, I consider this opinion to be correct because I consider this evidence to be the strongest, or whatever criteria, whatever evidence they may, prioritize one over the other. But sometimes, like for example here in this section, Shaykh Sayyid, he's not doing tarjih. That's why he lists out all the opinions. You follow what I'm saying? Which he doesn't do that often in this book. So just an interesting kind of observation that I noted. Okay. The next section is on voluntary prayer at dawn before the morning prayer. And so this is basically talking about once you have prayed 2 rak'ahs, there is no other salah to be made. When the time for Salatul Fajr comes in, there's only the 2 rak'ahs of sunnah before Salatul Fajr. There's no other prayers to be made. You don't pray extra nafil, you don't do any other salawat at that time. And that's what he's generally saying, and that is the opinion of many of the ulama. Imam Malik, he allowed for those that missed voluntary prayers during the night due to some excuse, they can pray in that time. If it's your continual practice to pray, for example, tahajjud, 2 rak'ahs or salatul witr and so forth, and if you missed it, you can pray it during that time. That's Imam Malik's his position. Okay, and he talks a little bit about the variants of that too. He quotes Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu, says, it does not bother me if they make the iqamah to prayer while I am praying witr. In other words, he's using that as an evidence here to say that that's another reason, this is another evidence that it is okay to pray. So there's some difference of opinion here as to whether or not you can pray beyond the 2 rak'ahs of sunnah before Salatul Fajr. Okay. And then the last section there is about praying any tatawwa. Tatawwa is extra prayers, nafil prayers. After Salatul Fajr has come in and the iqamah is being made. So this happens, right? Especially with brothers. You come to the masjid, get to the masjid a little bit delayed, and the iqamah is already going off for Fajr, but you didn't pray your 2 rak'ahs. And as the Prophet ﷺ said, ركعتي الفجر خير مما طلع عليه الشمس أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم, that the 2 rak'ahs before Fajr are better than everything that the sun has risen over. In other words, everything in the dunya. خير من الدنيا وما فيها. In another riwayah, another narration, that is better than everything in this dunya and everything in it. So you don't want to miss those 2 rak'ahs, sunnah, for Fajr, but you came into the masjid, the iqamah is going, what do you do? That's the question, right? That's the question. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they quote the hadith that's mentioned in many of the books of hadith. If the prayer is beginning, there is no prayer save the obligatory one. In other words, if the iqamah is on, or the prayer, the fard prayer is taking place, there is no other extra prayer you should be doing on the side. And he quotes some instances when that happened during the time of the Prophet. Now, with Salatul Fajr, the 2 rak'ahs before Fajr, there is a little bit of variance here. And so, Imam al-Shafi'i was a little more lenient and gave the allowance that if you can pray those 2 rak'ahs quickly, and you know that the fard prayer that's being done in Jama'ah, they're not going to, the Imam is not going to finish reading Surah Al-Fatiha, another surah. If you're going to catch it before the ruku', then it's okay. Right? So he gave a little bit more room there because of the high status of that particular prayer. So if one comes into the masjid and the iqamah is about to be made, you pray 2 rak'ahs quickly. If the iqamah is being made and you know your imam recites for long, you pray quickly, 2 rak'ahs. And those 2 rak'ahs are to be prayed quickly, as it is also. Meaning, when we say quickly, it doesn't mean to be rushed, but it just means that was the way the Prophet ﷺ would pray. 2 rak'ahs before Fajr and 2 rak'ahs after Maghrib, he would pray them quicker. They were more concise, so to speak. So that's some guidance as far as that is concerned. If it is your constant practice to pray 2 rak'ahs of Fajr before Salah, and you have the time to quickly make them before the Fard prayer or at the very beginning of Fard, that's okay. If not, you join the Fariidah, the obligatory prayer. Okay? No. I don't know if he covers it here or I don't know if he covers it later, but he doesn't cover it here, so I'll just mention it's worth mentioning. And it probably comes later, but since it's related, if you come and the Jama'ah is already taking place for Fajr, in the Hanafi school, you cannot make up the 2 rak'ahs of Fajr, before Fajr, the Sunnah. You follow? You came to the masjid, they're praying Fard, they're praying the Jama'ah for Salatul Fajr. You didn't pray your Sunnah yet, what do? Join the Jama'ah. According to the Hanafis, you can't pray the 2 after. According to the Shafis, you can pray the 2 rak'ahs after. So that's another way by which to navigate. Acceptable. Inshallah, you want to gain that maximum reward. Inshallah, acceptable to do that, even if you're Hanafi. Okay. Any questions? Okay. So we're going to get now into some of the things that are to be done. By the way, these last couple sections that we just covered, what were they about? Huh? No, yes, voluntary, but as it relates to, we were still talking about timing. Very good. We were still talking about timing. Right? We started by talking about timing of Fard, then he was talking about timing of Nafil. So that's what that section was. Now he's going to get into other matters that need to be established for the prayer to be established. Huh? And then he's going to get into the obligatory acts of salah, inshallah. So, and of course, what is a particular distinguishing characteristic of the Muslim Ummah, that is from the great blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on us, is that He has given us the adhan. Right? The adhan, we take it for granted, but when you really think about it, it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing on many levels. Number one, as Sheikh Sayyid mentions, that he quotes Al-Qurtubi, and others have said that the adhan, although it has very few words, covers all essentials of the faith. It begins by proclaiming the greatness of Allah, Allahu Akbar. It mentions His oneness and the denial of polytheism, and it confers the messengership of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. And then it calls to specific acts of obedience. Hayya ala salah, come to the prayer. And it calls to prosperity, to success. Hayya ala falah. And so it's beautiful in that sense. Another beautiful thing about the Quran is these hidden virtues that we know from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As related in the hadith by Imam al-Bukhari and others, the Prophet ﷺ said, if the people knew what was in the adhan, in the first row, meaning the first row of prayer as it relates to the virtuous nature of the adhan and praying the first row, and that they could not get it save by drawing lots, they would draw lots. Drawing lots meaning the only way I can get into the front row is like if I'm gonna I have to put my name in a hat and my name to be picked out, and that's the way I'm gonna do it anyway, which way I can. Right? And he says if they knew the reward for praying the noon prayer early in its time, they would race to it. And if they knew the reward for the night and the morning prayers in jama'ah, they would come to them even if they had to crawl. So, talking about different virtues of different things related to the salah. The first sentence that he mentions there, if they knew what was in the adhan, the value of the adhan, they would do this no matter what. And if they knew what was in the first row of prayer, they would do this no matter, they would strive to get to that first row. You know what's interesting, sometimes in the masjid, you see brothers and there's like one or two spaces in the front row, and the guys in the second row, they're like, no, you go ahead. No, take it, grab it. Don't let the next guy go. That's yours, take it. That's what the Prophet is saying, right? Not like, don't like bum rush or tackle your brother to get it. That's not what I'm saying. But if it's there for you to take, and there's a great virtue in it. So the adhan, the Prophet puts in that same regard. And then, the Prophet he says, the al-mu'adhdhinun, the people who make the adhan will have the longest necks on the day of judgment. Another thing that will distinguish them from others on Yawm al-Qiyamah. You will be able to see them and they will be distinguished by their long, meaning this is something that will separate them from the rest. Right? And then the other beauty in this dunya, how many people come to Islam by hearing the adhan? How beautiful, how undeniably beautiful is it when you're on the streets of Cairo or Istanbul or anywhere in the Muslim world and you hear the adhan being called, and it calls to your soul, right? And then, there's a nice story. Are you all familiar with the story behind the adhan, how it came about? Some of you. So it's worth mentioning this. I typically am not going into the, the evidence is too deep, but this is a beautiful story, it's worth mentioning. Ibn Umar, he said that the Muslims would gather and calculate, this is in the event behind this legislation, right? The Muslims would gather and calculate the time of prayer, and no one would call them. They spoke about that one day. In other words, like in the beginning, they just would kind of gather around, and there was no way by which the prayer was started. Like people would just kind of random come. I'm talking about in the early days in Medina. And then somehow they would just start the salah, right? There was no specific method. And then someone said, or some people said, we should have a bell like the Christians. In other words, we have to have a signal to signal the beginning of salah. Like we just gathering randomly and hoping that we're there at the right time and hoping we didn't miss it. And then others said we should have a horn like the Jews. The Jews still have it till today. You go to Jewish temple and they pull it out on their holidays and stuff. They have a horn. And then Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he suggested, why don't we have one person call the others to prayer? And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, stand Bilal and make the call to prayer. Now that was one version. There's another hadith that gives more detail of this. And this is where Abdullah ibn Zayd ibn Abdul Rabbi, he says when the Prophet ﷺ was to order the use of a bell to call the people to prayer, he disliked it because it resembled a Christian practice. They were contemplating it, but the Prophet didn't want to do it. This Sahabi, he says, while I was sleeping, a man came to me carrying a bell. He's dreaming. And he says, I said to him, oh, Ya Abdullah, will you sell me that bell? And this other man in his dream said, what would you do with it? And this Sahabi, Abdullah, he says, I would call the people to prayer with it. This man in his dream said, shall I not guide you to something better than that? And the Sahabi in his dream, he said, yes. And he said, you should say, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. All of the words of the adhan. He gave it to him in his dream. And then when the morning came, this Sahabi, he went to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and told him about his dream. Right? That was the time when they were contemplating, how do we start the salah? They were actively talking, like, what did we do? And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, your dream is true. Inshallah, go to Bilal, tell him what you have seen, and tell him to make the call to prayer, for he has the best voice among you. And so he goes to Bilal, tells him, and he makes the adhan. And then Umar was in his home when he hears the adhan being called for the first time, and then he goes and he rushes to the Prophet and he says, I saw the same dream. I saw the same. So subhanAllah. That's how the adhan came about, the gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alright. How the adhan is made, there's actually 3 different ways in which it can be made. 2 of them being the more common, one of them being the most common, another being less common. The first one is the adhan that we all know. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala falah, Hayya ala falah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, la ilaha illallah. The second way, and in the Shafi'i school, is that there is the same beginning, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And then, and after each of the phrases that you say in a lower voice. And some Shafi'is, they still do this today. but very rare that you'll find it like, you know, and they have their evidence for that. And then a third way is that it's 2 times at the beginning, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, and then the rest of the adhan is the same. I've never heard that in practice, but that's also, there is a narration by Imam Muslim where that is mentioned, okay, by one of the Sahaba. Alright, so that's the adhan. Of course, in Salatul Fajr, you add to the adhan what? As-salatu khayrun minan nawm. Some of the, I think in the Zahiri school, they say no, that's not part of the adhan. But by and large, that's the practice in everywhere in the Muslim world. And of course, you say that after what? Hayya ala al-falah. And you say, salatu khayrun minan nawm, salatu khayrun minan nawm. Okay, so that's the adhan. Just a word of advice, right? The adhan is, it's a beautiful thing. And brothers like to, some brothers are way too shy to say it. Others, they like to get up and they like to say it. If you are going to be the one that's saying it in public, and ensure that you're saying it right. It's very common that brothers make all kind of random mistakes as it relates to the adhan, right? If you're going to be the one that you like to make the adhan, alhamdulillah, there's no problem with that. Check it with somebody. Because people make very, very common mistakes, which, you know, sometimes change the whole meaning. Sometimes people say, Allahu Akbar, Akbar, like extending the alif, right? Or, and Akbar has a different meaning. People say, I don't know, people say all kind of random things, right? So get your adhan correct before you get in the public space and say it. Let's see. So people will say, for example, they'll say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. People say, Ashhadu anna la ilaha illallah. It's a mistake completely. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. When you join an and la, because what? An la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. But some people say, Ashhadu anna la ilaha. No, that's a mistake. People say, Ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah. His name is Muhammad, not Muhammad. Right? Don't change the adhan by your voice, you know, like inflections and different things, right? By your trying to say it nicely. Let's see, the iqamah. There are 3 ways to say the iqamah, and this is practice. These 3 different ways. In the Hanafi school, how? Just like the adhan, right? And they'll, like you'll see in the books of fiqh, you'll say 19 phrases, right? Allahu Akbar 4 times, Shadu an la ilaha illallah, 2 times, Shadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah 2 times, etc. Right? Just like the adhan. That's the Hanafi iqamah. In the Shafi'i school, how is it said?
Beginning twice, ending twice, and consonant twice. Everything else once.
Good, very good. Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah, Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala al-falah, qad qamatis salatu, qad qamatis salah, Allahu Akbar, la ilaha illallah. Right? In the Maliki school, how? Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah, Hayya ala salati, Hayya ala al-falah, qad qamatis salatu, one time. Iqamat as-salat, one time. So that's the difference. Some people, they mix it up. They do like this. They'll say, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Can't do that. They say Allahu Akbar 4 times, but then the other phrase is 1 time. If you're going to do that, keep it on, it has to be, everything has to flow. You follow what I'm saying? People will do strange things, they'll mix and match. These are the 3 ways that Iqamah should be, nothing other than that. Okay? Any questions? Yes?
So Imam Malik, his main delivery was the people of Medina, right?
Yes.
But, and then it says, Ibn Abdul Bar, he said, or no, so Ibn Qayyim says it's not, the Rasul never did it once.
Yeah.
So how come the people of Medina were doing it once?
Good question. It is, so Ibn al-Qayyim says, it is not proven that the Messenger of Allah ever said, قَدْ قَامَتِ الصَّلَاةُ only once. That's based on his research, based on his sources. But that doesn't mean Imam Malik didn't have his sources that heard otherwise. That's it. I mean, that's what it comes down to, right? So when Ibn al-Qayyim is making a definitive statement, according to his knowledge, right? And there are even Sahaba, they would make definitive statements as such. That's according to their knowledge, right? And that's because of this way in which fiqh is navigated, or the ulama, they deduced rulings for fiqh. That's why you have the differences. Yeah.
It says in the beginning, the virtues of the Isha and Fajr congregation. Does that mean Jama'ah in the masjid, or is Jama'ah at home counted?
Jama'ah in the masjid is, inshallah, more rewarded, but Jama'ah in the home is also rewarded on a multiple.
So this hadith applies to which one?
Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. The inferences about Jama'ah in the masjid. You don't have multiple rows at home.
So that makes it Jama'ah. What's the thing on fire?
Yeah. More than one person. But there is difference of opinion on what the establishment, what constituted a Jama'ah for you to achieve those rewards. And but the hadith seems to be, that particular hadith seems to be a clear indication of Jama'ah in the masjid. You don't have multiple rows at home. Unless you have a large family, unless you have a building and there's multiple families, like in the old country, that's how people live, right? Parents have one floor, and then the kids with their kids have their own floors or whatever, right? In that circumstance, there may be some space for this to apply as such. But generally speaking, for example, the Prophet says that Salatul Jama'ah is better than by 27 times, 29 times. Those hadith, those on their surface could be understood that praying together at home in Jama'ah you will take that reward, right? But the reward for praying in Jama'ah in the masjid is more. The bigger the Jama'ah, the more the reward. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam, right? The point of Jama'ah and setting a time at the masjid is to have the maximum amount of people. That's specifically what the ulama say. They say takfir al-jama'ah, to make it as much as possible. That's the goal. So, like when a masjid or the MSA establishes a prayer time, it should be at a time when we can have the most people. That's the criteria to use. Okay. Um, let's see. What is said during the adhan, right? For the ones that are listening, and this is, more so, um, more, what do you call it? Applicable to all, because the one making the adhan is one person, or the iqama is one person, but the one who is listening are many, right? The people that are listening are many. So you repeat after the mu'adhin everything that they say, but you say differently what? Than the mu'adhin. Hayya ala salah, you say لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. Right? حي على الفلاح لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. Everything else is just you repeat what the mu'adhin says. And this was this is the prophetic guidance. Okay. Let's see. And then, and so I just went over this section quickly. It doesn't need to go into too much detail. The dua after the adhan. What's the dua after adhan? Let's hear it from someone. Allahumma.
Isn't there an additional in some, there's like,
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a second. So memorize this dua. This is all of your homework for next time. You have 3 weeks I want everybody to memorize this dua. And I'm going to tell you in a minute why I want you to memorize this dua. Maybe we can send it in the group chat. You guys have it. اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آتي سيدنا محمد الوسيلة والفضيلة وابعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته. Memorize the dua. It's a little hard, especially if you're not, Arabic is not your, language and all. But it's just do it. Just read it every day at every single prayer. At the beginning of the prayer, when the time comes in, if you have your alarm clock at home, make it a habit to read it, even if you're not listening to the full adhan. Read it every day for 3 weeks, you'll have it memorized. That's it. That's all you got to do. Why? What's the beauty? What's the virtue of it? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said what? It doesn't give the full hadith here, huh?
It says he gets the intercession of the Rasul.
Yeah, where is it?
Right above the translation.
I'm sorry?
Right
Which-
above the translation of the dua, which is the end of the paragraph.
Is not in my book?
The top of page 100. In that
Top of
paragraph.
page 100. Oh, okay, yeah, there you go. Jazakallah khairan. Yes. So the Prophet ﷺ, he says, if you hear the call to prayer, repeat after it. So this is the purpose of doing it all the way through, right? Repeat after it. After the mu'adhin, then supplicate for me this dua that we just mentioned. For whoever makes one supplication for me, Allah makes 10 for him. Then ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant me the place of wasila. It is a place in paradise reserved for a slave from among the slaves of Allah. I hope to be him, and whoever asks Allah to grant me the place of wasila, my intercession becomes permissible for him. Wajibat, that it happens. I will intercede for them. And that's what we want. And that's what we need for our safety and our security, for Rasulullah sallallahu to ask on our behalf, to step in on our behalf in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that we will be saved. So that we will be saved from punishment. Okay? And that's what and the way you gain it, one of the ways you gain it, simply by making this dua after the adhan. What a great and huge blessing, by just saying a few words. So that's why I I want you to memorize it, fully incorporate it into your lives, inshallah ta'ala. On that note, we should take heed of what exactly we are saying and requesting and do just that. And we make that adhan for Salat al-Asr.
Should go on the check. Yes. Yeah. Send us people to be after that.
I guess it's working again.
Ibrahim said that usually in order to look at this is to be on the table, so if you take the